Now I'm sure you've seen it in a film or heard it in a song, a car full of smoke and everybody giggling inside, but does hotboxing actually work or is it all for show? But before we get into the research around hotboxing, please like, leave a comment, and if you want to, subscribe. It really does help me a ton. The practice, commonly referred to as hotboxing, involves the consumption of cannabis, typically through smoking within a confined or poorly ventilated environment, such as a sealed car or small room. The fundamental principle underlining hotboxing is the trapping and subsequent re-inhalation of cannabinoids present in the smoke expelled by users. I actually covered this very briefly, or the biological process, in this video, so do check it out. Studies have shown that when people smoke or vape cannabis, they exhale active THC, and not just a little bit either. In some cases, up to 35% of what they inhaled can come straight back out. And in fact, there's a fair bit of research on this, and like all fascinating stuff, quite a lot of it comes from the 1980s. Even back then, small studies found detectable THC in blood and urine after passive exposure to cannabis in extreme conditions, like a sealed car or small unventilated room. But others found no THC in the blood at all and only trace amounts of THC in urine. My biggest argument with this, however, is that cannabis was much weaker back in the 80s, so I wanted to see what current literature is actually saying about this. A study by Zhao et al. Examined how different methods of consuming cannabis affect emission rates and the behavior of secondhand smoke particles in a sealed environment. 4 common cannabis consumption methods were used inside a sealed car, comparing each to cigarette smoke to assess the relative intensity of exposure. Now there are 2 key terms that I want to highlight: mainstream smoke, and this is what the smoker inhales then exhales, and then side stream smoke, the smoke that comes off burning a joint between puffs. Now out of the 4 cannabis consumption methods, a joint, a bong, a glass pipe, or a vape pen, which do you think had the biggest impact when it comes to secondhand smoke emission? Take a guess and drop it in the comments below. I'm curious to see what you think. What the researchers actually found is that a joint produced the highest emission, likely due to the continuous smouldering between puffs, which means that there's both high side stream and mainstream smoke. Next up, it was a vape pen. It had surprisingly high emissions despite the absence of combustion and side stream smoke. Next, it's the bong. Emissions were somewhat reduced, with the researchers speculating due to the partial filtration through the water. And finally, we have the glass pipe. This recorded the lowest emission among cannabis methods tested. Like the bong, the secondhand smoke here may be largely composed of exhaled mainstream smoke rather than the side stream emissions. And I think the researchers hit the nail on the head. Joints burn continuously, often containing more cannabis, which leads to persistent smoke output. In contrast with a bong or glass pipe, you typically use a smaller amount of cannabis and it's consumed in a single puff before you have to refill. And as for a vape pen, while there's no combustion, there's often dense aerosols exhaled after each puff, meaning the clouds are just a lot heavier and bigger. While the study only involved 1 single participant, it still highlights an important point which is worth considering. The way in which cannabis is consumed in a sealed environment can significantly affect how much smoke builds up or how intense the hotbox effects become. And one of the final bits of research I'd like to talk about is from Herman et al. They put 6 cannabis smokers and 6 non-cannabis smokers into a sealed chamber. It was basically the size of a small bedroom, around 10 foot by 13 foot, with 7 foot ceilings. Smokers blazed away on high potency weed. Now we're talking around 11.3% THC, which at the time was pretty strong for lab supplied cannabis. However, compared to street cannabis or some medical cannabis, this is still quite weak. They tested 2 versions of this setup, one with 0 ventilation, so basically the most ideal hotbox, and one where they called the standard residential ventilation, roughly around 11 air changes per hour, which is about the same you get in a standard house with normal air conditioning. Now, I know that some houses don't have air conditioning, but this is an American study. In the unventilated hotbox condition, the non-smokers had detectable THC in their blood. One even failed a workplace drug test, with the participants reporting that they felt high. Things felt slower, they were tired, hungry. Some even performed worse on basic memory retention tests. In the ventilated room, almost none of that happened. Most non-smokers didn't test positive and didn't report any feelings of being intoxicated. But what is quite interesting, whether the room was ventilated or not, the smokers, so the people who were actually smoking the cannabis, their THC blood levels were basically the same. And of course we want to be critical, and one of the biggest takeaways is that it's another small study, so a small participant pool. But I think this is very common for cannabis research. It's very tricky to get the ethical, legal, and health approvals in place, which makes large-scale studies on real people extremely difficult to do, especially in countries where there are tight regulations on cannabis. Small criticisms aside, all the participants knew that they were taking part in a cannabis study. However, the researchers didn't blind participants, there was no placebo, and since all the non-smokers had used cannabis before, their reported effects could stem partially from expectancy rather than actual pharmacological exposure. So from what we've discussed today, what is the takeaway? Hotboxing does seem to be a very real thing, but it's very heavily influenced by many key factors. This includes how strong the cannabis is, how ventilated the space is, and how it's being consumed. Anything that burns continuously or has thick clouds are going to fill up the room more than something like a one-hitter or bong. And another big thing to remember is hotboxing probably impacts the non-smokers in the room more than the people actually lighting up. So if you're using it as a way to get higher and you're already the one smoking, it's probably not going to have much of an effect. But on the flip side, if you are lighting up and you are in a sealed room with a group of people, it may be considerate to check if they also potentially want to get high, because the research shows if there's not a lot of ventilation, then the chances are they will get high as well. Obviously with the T's and C's of all the factors we've mentioned, like strength, ventilation, how it's being consumed. But with this in mind, I'd be really interested to hear other people's experiences with hotboxing, what makes it better, what makes it worse. So please be vocal, let me know in the comments below, and thank you so much for watching. Please stick around for the ramble where I just go off script and just kind of talk about my own thoughts, feelings, interpretations, and discuss kind of at random what I feel about the topic of hotboxing in general. Hello and welcome to the ramble. This topic was really interesting for me to research because I've actually got no personal experience with hotboxing. I've never done it personally, I've never seen people hotbox, and I've heard of stories of people hotboxing, and I've never actually heard of whether it worked for them or not. I've just heard people go, oh, I was in a hotbox, yada yada yada. So actually to look into the more like scientific aspect of hotboxing, it was really interesting and I really enjoyed it. And as I touched on it, like a lot of studies came about in the 80s. I think that's when there was kind of more of a scientific interest of the benefits of cannabis, but I think with the 80s it was kind of difficult for studies or universities, I should say, to actually use cannabis. I think they had to get it from like police raids essentially. It's not something that was like readily available, not like it is today. So I think it's where we found like a big boon of cannabis research sort of in the 80s, and then it kind of trickled out as sort of regulations tightened, and then now that cannabis is sort of seen as more of a, or the therapeutic benefits are beginning to be recognized, and there's more medical and more of a medical interest. We're getting more and more research into sort of areas like this, but since there's no medical need for a hotbox, so your doctor's not going to be like prescribing you, you need to have 3 hotbox sessions a day. Again, it's not an area that I don't think is going to be researched too heavily because it's got no wider benefits other than it's, I guess people do it because of movies and TV shows or whatever, or they're just in a room with other people who are smoking cannabis. But I could be wrong, and I hope that I'm wrong, and I hope that someone comes along and does a big meta-analysis on the 3 studies that are out there. But yeah, I hope that we do get chance to people to do research, and if you're a researcher looking to do cannabis research, maybe here's a good area to look into. But I was most fascinated by the concept of different ways of consuming cannabis, and that having kind of almost a drastic impact on like patient or user experiences. And it makes a lot of sense, and I do actually agree with the logic of a joint or a blunt that continuously burns. Obviously it's like almost like an incense stick, it's always going on in the background. But with a vape, a bong, glass pipe, and like a one hitter, you fill it up, you light it, take your hit, exhale, and that's the air quotes mainstream smoke. But there's no side stream smoke other than maybe a little bit of the residual cannabis that's been burning, I should say. So I guess if you are looking into hotboxing, then yeah, consider like the strength of your cannabis also playing a large role, but also like how you do it and how ventilated the room is. Again, I kind of mentioned it in the main video. I still think we can use that information and be considerate of others. Like if you are with a group of people in a sealed room, I don't know why you'd be in a sealed room or a poorly ventilated room and you are going to light up, maybe just be considerate and check with the other people that they're not planning to drive, or they're okay that they may get a contact high or through your smoke, especially if you are burning the high grade. But it's nice to actually have some research that can lean into actually, yeah, there are sort of almost empirical evidence of this thing working. So I do really enjoy that, and I find it really interesting. But I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this video, and yeah, a huge thank you, and check out my channel for other videos and consider subscribing. Thank you so much again. Take care.